Hi everybody, if you found yourself watching this video but haven't watched the previous videos in this series yet, I do recommend giving them a watch just for some context, but otherwise let's hop into things. On our quest to awaken the 5 sages from the temples across Hyrule, we've managed to liberate Kokiri Forest from its monster infestation and awaken our childhood friend Saria as the sage of the forest. Then we rescued the Gorons from the fire temple and awakened Darunia as the sage of fire. Next on our list is the water temple. But there is some important stuff that we need to do before we actually get there. Navi will hint at an arctic wind that's blowing from Zora's domain, but honestly, so far as Adult Link, we've just been retracing our steps and entering dungeons that are more or less in the same sections of the map as the dungeons we went through as Child Link. So it's not exactly a leap that players would think to go back to Zora's domain to see how things have changed over there. Upon entering Zora's domain itself, we'll find it entirely frozen over. The Zoras themselves are trapped below the ice, though we don't really see them, and the king is frozen in a strange form of red ice. If we walk on past him, we'll find that big fishy Jabu Jabu is actually nowhere to be seen, and there are these huge ice chunks floating in the water. By following along these platforms, we can find the entrance to the Ice Cavern. Yeah, okay, so let's back up a moment here. This is not the water temple, but rather a mini dungeon that we need to complete before we can actually get to the real next dungeon. I considered doing a video on just the Ice Cavern, but let's be honest here. It's frankly too small and simple to warrant a full-length video. It's better to just include it in this section of the video anyways, as having these sort of mini dungeons is pretty well how the pace of the rest of the game is going to go anyways. As far as the atmosphere goes, this place is pretty eerie. It's always reminded me of that scene from Empire Strikes Back where Luke gets captured by the Wampa on Hoth. But I digress. The music, of course, matches perfectly. There's something about this instrumentation that gives off a sort of ice crystal resonance in my head. It just fits perfectly. Progressing through here is pretty simple, but that makes sense for this being the mini dungeon that it is. Down the entrance hallway we'll fight a couple of Friezards in this round blade trap room before proceeding down another snowy hallway to the central room. There's 3 paths to take from here, but 2 are blocked by red ice, so all you can do is collect these silver rupees to unlock the door on the eastern end of this room. Taking the hallway down here gives us the map and a source of blue fire, which we can use to melt the red ice. For this reason, I recommend having gotten all 4 empty bottles already to minimize backtracking, though there's already a fair amount of these blue fire sources anyways, so you'll be fine even if you don't have all the bottles. Since we now have blue fire, we can proceed through the other 2 paths in the central room. The path to the south will give us the compass, and the path to the north will bring us to the sliding block puzzle room, where we will need to collect more silver rupees to unlock the door here. Once we've collected them all and the door is unlocked, we can proceed to the final room where we will fight the closest thing this dungeon has to a boss, that being a white Wolfos. By now we've fought our fair share of challenging enemies, so you should be able to take them on pretty quickly. The chest here will reward our efforts with the iron boots, and Sheik will appear to teach us the warp song as usual, the Serenade of Water in this case. Sheik also explains how while all of the Zoras were frozen under the ice, Princess Ruto actually was freed and went off to investigate the water temple, which is apparently where the source of this ice curse is somehow. With the iron boots, we can take a shortcut back to the entry room, and we are out of here. While pretty simple, I actually like the Ice Cavern a lot. While generally unpopular, I am a sucker for sliding block puzzles in Zelda games, and there's just this eerie mood that is accomplished so well here. Considering its small size, there's also a lot of secrets hidden here, including 3 gold Skulltulas and a piece of heart, so it's worth being thorough. I also just have to mention real quick that the room where we fight the Wolfos is just visually one of the coolest rooms in the entire game. Before we use our new warp song to skip straight ahead to the dungeon, make sure to stop back at Zora's domain, unfreeze the king, and get your blue tunic, which will allow you to breathe underwater, which is going to be absolutely essential for the upcoming dungeon. Anyways, with all of that said, now that we have our new iron boots and blue tunic, we can reach the bottom of Lake Hylia, which I should mention is mostly drained except for a small portion, where we will find the entrance to the water temple. Honestly, the water temple gets a bad rap. It is by and large what many consider to be the game's most difficult dungeon, coming hot off the heels of the fire temple, which is action-packed but pretty straightforward. I can see how it would give players a hard time. The water temple is not a gauntlet of challenges, obstacle courses, and battles like the fire temple was. It is instead a deeply intertwined labyrinth of locked doors. This is not to say that there are no battles and no challenges, because there are, but the dungeon's biggest obstacle is simply knowing how to navigate it. Like the forest temple, we have a large central room that nearly every part of the dungeon branches off from. But this central room actually spans 3 floors, some of which are only accessible depending on the water level, which you have to change throughout the dungeon, but can only do so from certain locations. There's a huge emphasis on this navigational challenge and of traversing underwater, which can be especially challenging since you can't actually use your sword underwater. The only item you can use is your hookshot, which can deal some damage to your enemies, but remember that its main function is for traversal, not combat. So if you find yourself hitting locked doors, having to double back and getting mixed up turned around, then know you're not alone. You're sharing a sentiment shared by many of the Zelda community. This dungeon is the biggest challenge this game has thrown at us so far. But you know what? I love it. But worth a quick mention, here's some things that may alleviate your stress here. Number 1, I've neglected to mention it up until now, but with King Zora Unfrozen, it's worth doing the side quest to get the Big Goron sword. It will help a lot since it does double the damage of the Master Sword. The game has actually done a really great job of teasing out this quest to us since we first emerged as Adult Link, and it's done really well. Number 2, getting Farore's Wind from the Fairy Fountain near Zora's Domain is also worthwhile. Farore's Wind is a warp magic, so if you find yourself deep into the depths of the dungeon, up against a locked door that you don't have a key for, you can cast the spell to make returning to this point easier. In fact, this one is the only dungeon in the entire game that I consistently find myself using this spell in. And number 3, use the map. The Fire Temple may have been a straightforward and onward kind of dungeon that looped you back to the main path whenever you needed to briefly stray off course, but here, almost the whole dungeon is laid out in front of you from the start. Everything branches off of that central room, so there isn't a quote-unquote main path to adhere to. Instead, it is a matter of planning your actions, gathering the necessary keys, and seeing what paths work and what is a dead end. Hey, also, because I mention it in every video, can I just gush about the music here? It's actually beautiful. There's this distorted watery sound, perfect for the water temple, pleasant chimes or bells, a flute, and what is that, a sitar? I'm not really sure, but whatever string instrument that they use here, I am totally in love with its sound. All of the instrumentation is used super well to create this brilliant ambience. There's a pleasant optimism in the bells, which cascade throughout the track, but there is also an air of danger and mystery. It's brilliant. The water temple doesn't have a real foyer like the previous 2 dungeons have had, so as soon as we enter, we are standing at the top of this big square central room. As previously mentioned, this room is massive, spanning 3 floors. A central tower rises through the room, which houses interior central rooms, and of course, there are so many doors. You thought having 6 paths from the Forest Temple's main room was a lot? There are 4 paths off of the first floor, 3 more off of the second, and 4 including the dungeon entrance from the 3rd, and those are the ones branching outward. There's also 2 more doors for going in and out of the central tower. At least the Forest Temple's 6 paths only really had 1 that was unlocked from the get-go. Here, however, while many of them are out of reach and inaccessible, I think just this sheer volume of options right off the bat is part of what many players feel is so overwhelming about this place. My personal method is to just narrow your thinking down to just think about the floor you have at hand. If you think of this massive central room as a whole, you will drown in options. If you take it slow and break each floor down, you should be able to reduce the amount of backtracking that you need to do and avoid feeling overwhelmed. Just try to find the balance between doing that and not losing sight of the bigger picture here. So we start off coming in the entrance from the south of the 3rd floor in the central room. While here on this 3rd floor, there are really only 3 paths before us. The door to the west is locked, so don't worry about that yet. The platform to the north is completely out of reach, and so that just leaves the hallway on the east side. There isn't much to do here, but make sure you at least start this puzzle of pulling this block back into place, otherwise later you will get stuck here. So obviously the 3rd floor didn't have much for us, so we can start to move downwards. Because of the water level being where it is, there isn't really anything we can do on the 2nd floor either, except for zip down the hallway, again on the east end, and nab the compass. Based on the water level here and the hookshot target being where it is, I'm pretty sure that we're actually meant to get the compass later, but we might as well just grab it right away since we can. I'll admit that getting the compass before the map always feels a little weird to me, but the sooner we can see where the treasure chests are on the map, the better. Sinking all the way to the very bottom floor, we can really start to make some progress here. There are 4 paths outward and 1 inward from here. The path to the north will bring us to a locked door that is also completely out of reach, so don't even bother with that. The path on the west is blocked off from a push block that we can't push, and the southern path is also a dead end that we'll need to bomb. However, we're underwater, so obviously we can't use bombs here. So there is only one way to actually go for now, which is once again the hallway to the east. Also take note of the little landmarks that are placed around down here, such as the dips in the floor and the torches. Down this hallway, we'll come face to face with Princess Ruto, who, much like Link, is now all grown up. She tells you that there are 3 places to change the water level in the dungeon and to follow her up to the first one. She swims upwards, but when we follow her, she is nowhere to be seen. Also, take note again the breadcrumbs and landmarks that are being left here for you. There's this barred door and bombable wall. All things to revisit when the water level is at an appropriate height. At the top of this room, we'll play Zelda's Lullaby to lower the water level, but before you go back down, don't forget to quickly go into the next room and grab yourself the map. Since this room is a dead end, the only way to go is back down the way we came. Since we lowered the water level, we can now light these torches at the bottom here to open this door. The lit torch in the middle here seems to imply that you should use your arrows, but it's just as easy to use Din's fire. Defeating the enemies in this next room will net us our very first key. Alright, so far so good. Also, since we've lowered the water level, there's quite a bit we can do on the bottom floor here. The most obvious would be to enter the central tower door, but that will only take us upwards. And as per my previous recommendation, it's best to try and clear everything out of each floor as best we can before ascending to another. So make sure to take advantage of that lower water level to explore the other paths here. The bombable floor to the south is an optional room for a gold sculptula. The push block room will take us through a couple of rooms, including this whirlpool room, which has another key for us. That north door, however, is still totally out of reach. So now that we've got another key, we can go ahead into the central tower room. Ascending in the tower, we'll find the second place where we can change the water level. This will raise it up to the halfway point, so the bottom section is submerged, but the second and third floor are out of the water. Make sure to sink down to find another key hidden after a small underwater combat challenge at the bottom of this room. So with the water up to the second floor now, here is where I'm pretty sure we're supposed to have gotten the compass, but if you've already got it, you can instead turn your attention elsewhere. Make sure to quickly backtrack here back to that bombable wall that was halfway up the room where we met Ruto in order to nab another key. This may be one of the only hidden keys in the dungeon that I find completely counterintuitive to go out of the way for, but since the game has given us both the map and compass, at least we can see that there is a key hidden there to get. With that done, we can return to the second floor of the central room. The western door here is locked, but since the platforms here float to match the water level, it is now accessible. Don't worry about that I-switch door to the southern end of the second floor here, since the hookshot target there is also out of reach. This path actually loops us back to a small alcove at the very top of the third floor in the central room. This actually allows us to raise the water level back up to the top level as we had originally found it. But since we have a key to spare, and now that that same platform from before has floated up, the locked door on the third floor of the central room can now be accessed. Still with me? This door takes us to this waterfall room, which gives us a nice little challenge based around using the hookshot to quickly ascend up the platforms up to the other side of the room. It looks straightforward, but if you aren't quick to aim with that hookshot, then it may be more challenging than it looks. The next room has another neat hookshot puzzle that involves raising and lowering the statues that have hookshot targets on them in order to get through the room. It's neat, but not too complicated. This next door, however, takes us into this huge empty room. I love this part to bits. We can see from the map that it does have walls, but the room looks more like an empty, endless swamp. It's a strange illusion. There's nothing and nobody here, and walking across to the other end of the room, all we'll find is a locked door. Turning around, we'll see a shadowy figure under the lone tree in the center of the room, and this begins our battle against this dungeon's mid-boss, Dark Link. Okay, before we talk about the actual fight, the build-up here is just great. First of all, bit of an easy to miss detail, but when we first enter the room, we can see Link's reflection in the water, but when we pass by the tree where Dark Link appears, that reflection actually disappears. The tension here, that he appears off-screen behind you as well, is just so freaking cool. Dark Link here is probably the hardest mid-boss in the game. A lot of his attacks will mirror your own, and he actually will have more health depending on how many hearts you actually have up until this point. After over 2 decades of playing this game, this guy still gives me a hard time, but this challenge is heavily alleviated if you got the Big Goron sword. Normally, Dark Link will block most of your attacks. However, something about using a stab attack with the Big Goron sword actually allows you to break through his defenses, since your strike is lower to the ground than it is if you use the Master Sword. So 100% definitely do recommend using that sword for this fight. Once he's defeated, the illusion will be broken and the room will fade back to its normal form. Still massive though. Our reward for defeating Dark Link is actually the long shot. The long shot is basically just the hookshot again, but with twice the range. Now, since we've seen a few hookshot targets that have been out of reach, those should be no problem now. Continuing, we'll find ourselves in this underground river looking room with these vortexes. Be careful to not get sucked in, but if you use the iron boots and hookshot well enough, then you should be just fine. At the end of this room, we will get another key, and the path drops us to the whirlpool room on the first floor. So we can quickly go back to the central room, go through that I-switch hallway that we now have the long shot for, and finish the push block puzzle from the very start of the dungeon to nab one more key. Now we can duck back to the bottom, go into that northern locked door that was out of reach before, and we'll find ourselves in this room with the rolling boulders and tektites. I recommend using your bow to take out these guys before trying to cross, just to avoid taking damage. Passing through here real quick, we'll find another puzzle sort of room in which we'll need to push this block onto a switch to raise the water level. Quick mention here, but I like the way they telegraph the bombable wall for you in here, in which the light subtly reflects differently on those certain bricks. It's a small detail, but a nice one. There's one more room to quickly pass through, and we'll find ourselves having looped back to the boulder tektite room from before, but in an alcove at the top of the room, where we can spend our last key to get to this hidden room with the boss key. Phew! Anyways, now that we have the boss key and we found everything we need to, we can make our way back to the very top of the central room to check out that last out of reach ledge and make our way to the boss room. When we enter the boss room, we'll find it empty, with the exception of the pool of water here. Nothing seems out of the ordinary until Navi tells you that the water isn't normal. What? This moment strikes me as so eerie. It's one of those it's quiet, too quiet moments. If we hop onto one of the platforms here, we'll be treated to a cutscene from the boss's point of view as it rises from the water and sneaks up on Link. Then we see it. This is Morpha, a giant aquatic amoeba. Morpha has the ability to control water. The only way to defeat him is to use your hookshot to yank him out and then lay down a beating with your sword. This is easier said than done though, as Morpha moves through the water pretty quickly. Try to also stay moving, as Morpha can create tentacles to pick up and grab you. Morpha, like the water temple itself, kind of gets a bad rap. People think he's lame or not threatening, but when I see him grab and toss Link around the room like that, I feel its power conveyed to me right there. As long as Morpha is in the water, he's dangerous. While not the game's most difficult boss by a long shot, the very concept of Morpha being this organism that can manipulate water is one of the coolest and most unique boss concepts that I would love to see revisited in a future game. Anyways, wail on him enough and he'll go down, and quite literally, pop. The water drains from the room, we can grab our heart container and warp out. We'll find ourselves back in the Chamber of Sages. Ruto is the sage, no surprise there. And look, Lake Hylia is restored to its normal state. Hooray! Just don't forget to grab the fire arrows. So that's the dungeon. Overall, I think people are too hard on the water temple. It is definitely the game's most difficult dungeon, but I feel like that makes sense. It should be harder than those that we've already completed. Its music and atmosphere is top notch, and even though I have some gripes with its navigational aspects, as long as you stop, take a look at your map, and think about where you need to go, you should be able to manage. Some gripes though, that last locked door always trips me up. It always strikes me as counterintuitive to have to go back up to the second floor for that small key, so I almost always end up hitting this locked door, then casting Furore's Wind, and having to backtrack. At least with Furore's Wind, we can quickly return here once we've gotten that last key, but honestly, if that key were made a little less out of the way and wasn't a puzzle that you'd have to start early on, then abandon and come back to once you've gotten the long shot, then it would go a long way to make this dungeon less confusing. Raising the water level to get to the boss room is also kind of a pain as well, especially because you have to go out of your way to do so twice. Yeah, since the boss room is at the very top of the central room, you have to raise it all the way up. But to even access the room where you raise it to the top, you have to first raise it halfway. If you know what you're doing, it's not so bad, but if not, then I can understand it being an issue. That said, the dungeon is also full of great ideas, fun puzzles, and the game's very best mid-boss. It is challenging, but since when is challenge a bad thing? The fact that it makes you have to stop and think is always something that I've liked about it. It's not my favorite, but I will die on this hill when I say that it is not anywhere near as bad as people make it out to be. In fact, I like it a lot. Also, the Ice Cavern is fun. Too short, but still fun. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for when the next one comes out. You can also check out, I've got all of these dungeon design videos in a nice playlist here for you guys. I'm just gonna take a second to say thank you to those who decided to support me on Patreon as well, in particular those who supported at the cheese tier or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, and Callie. Thank you so much again, you guys, and I will catch you next time. Bye bye!